Well, good afternoon and welcome to this session at the annual meeting on generative AI. My name is Azeem Azhar. I'm the founder of Exponential View, and I'm an author and investor who specializes in exponential technologies and their potential, but more broadly, their impact across the political economy. And so today's panel is going to explore one of the most interesting developments in that intersection of advanced technologies and society, the question of generative AI. Now, generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that is capable of creating new content, such as images, text, or video, or even protein sequences, based on learning from enormous amounts of data and of similar information. Now, seemingly powerful, these tools seem capable of human-like outputs, sometimes superhuman outputs, in text and images and video. But in reality, they're statistical beasts lacking any real understanding of the world, of facts, of logic. They're adept liars in some cases. So like many technologies, they convey both potential and instability. Now, our expert panel today was going to look at the socioeconomic, educational, commercial, and cultural implications of this technology. And we're joined by Jean-Noël Barrot, the Minister-Delegate for the Digital Transition and Telecoms in France, by Hiroaki Kitano, Senior Executive Vice President and CTO of Sony Group. I should say, you have 3 jobs in this moment of labor tightness: the CEO of Sony AI and the President of the Systems Biology Institute. Thank you for reducing the pressure on the labor market there. Priya Lakhani, who is the CEO and founder of Century Tech, which is an AI-based educational technology company. And finally, Refik Anadol, an artist and director of Refik Anadol Studio. If you've been through the main Congress Center, you will have seen his beautiful work of art. Now, generative AI is a combination, of course, of technology and also humanity. So let's start with the humans in the audience, if I may. If you've used one of these new generative AI tools, perhaps to create images or to change your social media photo or engage in a chat, would you perhaps raise your hand? How many of you have used these tools? So I would say the vast majority. Now, could I ask, if you or your organization is now actually using these professionally to do something useful, would you raise your hands? So just again for the audience, I would say perhaps 5% of the audience is already putting these technologies to use, which is quite fascinating. But Minister, perhaps we can start with you. When we consider these tools, how do you assess their potential for impacting the labour market?
Well, I think the survey you've just run is very interesting, because if everyone or almost everyone in the room has tried those new tools, it means that everyone among us has the intuition that there is great promises associated with these technologies. But if very few of us in the room have actually implemented such solutions in their organizations, is because there are a number of limitations. And us as governments and regulators, we need to address some of these limitations. So among the promises, it's clear that even though AI is not new, that deep learning is not new, those large language models that now have the ability to learn based on huge samples and by resorting to huge amounts of computing capacity, can deliver stuff that are very impressive, and that might indeed become one of the key interface we have with machines in some sense. And that's perhaps the largest potential they have. And this is going to have important implications for work. I'm not among the pessimistic. I'm optimistic that if they take an important role in the labor market, then as any technology, this will allow us to shift our attention, our value added as humans, to other purposes. But that being said, even though there might be a huge amount of value created by these models for the labor market, it still needs to be demonstrated. And among the limitations, there are those that you highlighted. if you've tried the latest models, and I was last week at OpenAI chatting with the management team there, if you ask for very accurate responses, then you're going to have troubles.
Yeah.
And depending on the usage you have, you'll be surprised. If you're in a low faculty, you're worried. I mean, if you're a professor, I used to be a professor before I went into politics. Of course, when you look at those tools and that sort of were popularized in the recent weeks, you're worried. How am I going to design exams, right? So if you're in a low faculty, there is room for concern, because obviously if you ChatGPT, among other tools, will be able to deliver sort of exams that are relatively impressive. If you're in an economics faculty, then you're fine, because the ChatGPT will have a hard time finding or delivering something that is expected when you're in a graduate level economics faculty. So there is a lot of limitations as to what these models are able to do, and I think that people should be aware of that and look at what they can do and what they cannot do. And the reasoning part of it, the logics part of it, is not part of what they can do. But perhaps one of the other concerns from the government and the regulator point of view is the ethics of all this. The fact that since those models are learning from samples, that there may be biases in these samples. And that since those models have as one of their main benefits to be an interface between human and machines, that humans using those interfaces should understand or should have a basic knowledge of how these things work and what they're actually chatting with when we think about chat boxes. And this is the reason why we have in Europe undertaken a regulation or regulatory work on AI. We are currently negotiating the AI Act that has undertaken a risk-based approach by identifying a number of potential use cases, and sort of classifying those use cases into those with very high risks, where AI is going to be prohibited, and then use cases where risk is high or relatively high or moderate or low. And depending on the level of risk, then the accountability of those that develop these AI systems will be larger. We're currently negotiating this. It's tough because I think we are among the first in the world to address this issue, which is very new and which is very hard to address. And I think if we succeed, and I'm sure we will succeed, there will still be a number of questions, in particular ethical questions, that we need to address, so that the industry, as it grows, can build in ethics by design, rather than trying to solve the harm that it might at some point cause. So that's the path ahead for us regulators, finding the right way to stimulate innovation while protecting citizens around the world.
That is always the regulators' calling and challenge. Thank you so much for that nuanced answer, and we'll get a chance to drill into some of those issues. If I can come to you, Hiroaki, as Sony, as a business, of course, has many assets that rely very heavily on computation and on content. What's the potential for generative AI there, and how have you been experimenting with it?
Yeah, I think like a generative AI is, is a huge potential. I mean, this is not just something coming up like all of a sudden. We have like a long history of deep learning, convolution net, and also like a transformer model, now diffusion model. So this is like a continuous evolution of the AI capability in recent technology. And generative AI, particularly like we see like mid-journey diffusion, stable diffusions. And now we had a ChatGPT, and it has like a great opportunity to be able to demonstrate what AI can do today. At the same time, we see a lot of limitations. If you ask like a ChatGPT specific questions, sometimes like answers impressive. But if you go into the details, details like all the factual things may not be that accurate. It's like it would be if you go back to open a PC and then ask you, what about yourself. And then you see like, oops, I don't get this, kind of thing, all kind of things going on there. But it's in infancy. So for the Sony is basically the creative entertainment company backed by the technology. So we are here for the creators. So we consider this is a great offer, the great opportunity for the creators of all kinds. We deal with the artists, musicians, movie directors, game designers, and also, in a creator, we mean the engineers and scientists, entrepreneurs, because they create a future. So, we are the company to provide the technology and work with them to create new art form, new entertainment, and future opportunities. And this series of AI technology, it's emerging, provides like a huge opportunity. At the same time, as the minister mentions, we have to be very careful about the ethical aspect as well. How this can be used properly. At the same time, where the data come from. Is data ethically, justifiable, transparent, fair, and responsible? So in order to do this, to make sure that we are doing the right practice, Sony has the AI ethics lead, global lead for the AI ethics, who is Dr. Alice Chan, who used to be at the Partnership in AI. She joined Sony a couple of years ago, and she's taking care of the entire Sony Group AI ethics globally, and make sure those ethical issues can be cleared. But not just like, it's not really the burden. We consider that is a competitiveness. Being the ethical, creating ethical AI means quality. And it means that you can protect data providers, protect the users. So I think people are very impressed with the recent series of generative AI applications. Wow, this is now possible with AI. At the same time, I think this will continue to grow to be very practical. At the same time, we want to make sure those systems, working systems that we're going to build inside Sony as well, is in a legitimate basis. And that's critically important to be accepted by the industry. It's not just a demonstration, but going to the industry requires different responsibility. That means like ethical AI, responsible AI aspects is critically important.
Right. Thank you. Well, we should turn to Priya. And how has generative AI changed the discussion that you're having with teachers and those in the educational establishments?
So we spent 10 years talking about artificial intelligence in education, and you have the innovators and the pioneers, your typical kind of Everett Rogers adoption curve, where the pandemic accelerated that somewhat. ChatGPT comes out, and within about 5 hours in the morning, every educator is on social media talking about artificial intelligence. And for those of you who've left your children at home and think that they're not using it to inspire their homework, you are living on a cloud, right? They're all logged in and they're all doing that. And it's really amazing, actually. What I've seen across social media conversations, Azeem, is that there are educators who are seeing it as an enabler. And that's fascinating. They've gotten over the digital fatigue after the pandemic. They're interested in technology. They're using learning management systems, virtual learning environments. And they're thinking, okay, how can we use this? And how can we use it as an enabler across different contexts? But then you get the skeptics who are absolutely terrified, right? They're terrified because they're thinking, hang on, kids are going to cheat to do their homework. That has real world implications. Think about lost learning over the pandemic. Think about the children that weren't online or weren't able to learn in some form. If you're cheating your way through your homework, how does the teacher know that you've got a gap in learning? Homework or assignments or that sort of assessment where a teacher gives feedback is where a teacher, the professional who's teaching 1 to 30, 1 to 35, 1 to 50 in some countries, that is how they figure out when there's a learning gap. Now, if kids are basically using that ChatGPT, and there are issues with it, obviously making up sources, then how does a professional teacher where, they're already exhausted, right? The teachers are frazzled. How are they actually going to fill those in? That has a real world consequence into creating future learning losses. Where they're really struggling is in assessment. Now, what's really interesting about ChatGPT, and I think it's an opportunity for all of us, and if you are parents, if you're godparents, if you're aunties and uncles, this is relevant for each and every one of us. The assessment system across most of our countries is flawed. It has been in need of reform for many, many years. Right, the US, the UK, Netherlands, Spain, and I've written a longer post, so I won't spend too much time on it here, on TopLink, which I posted yesterday. The memorization strategy is the key strategy to passing those exams, well, ChatGPT can do that better than humans can. So what we need to do in education, and the conversation that we've been having with teachers and educators and policymakers, right? And this is what I always try and get across is, I know we have AI. Think about HI. How does human intelligence differ from artificial intelligence? What is the difference from essentially a fantastic set of statistical models and critical thinkers? Why is fake versus fact news not in the national curriculum? Why do we spend 3 weeks learning long division? I mean, who cares about long division, and we're still learning it? Why don't we spend those 3 weeks learning about financial literacy, mental health, fake versus fact? So that when our students, when your children are logging in and using this technology, they can actually see that a source might be made up. They might be looking for where some things come from. And so we need an assessment system, and the reason it comes to assessment is we treasure what we measure in this world. Everything comes from the OECD PISA rankings, and the way I like to describe it is a Minister for Education, right, one of your colleagues, they're all in their shiny jackets at Davos, and it is a real badge of honor if you're high up in the PISA rankings. But PISA rankings essentially test maths, the sciences, and your local language. If that's all that we're looking for, and we are not measuring things like critical thinking and creativity and proactivity and the entrepreneurial mindset, and by the way, WEF did a report on this like years ago, and again, I've referenced that in my piece. If we're not valuing those skills, then actually how is that going to trickle across to the classroom? Because ministers tend to value in their countries what ends up in that report. So that is an urgent conversation that all of us need to have, whether you're in education or not. It doesn't matter, it touches every single area of our lives, and that is the key conversation. But Azeem, I am hoping that this technology, as brilliant as actually I think it is, and I do think we need to think about ethics and regulation, absolutely, but I think it's going to hopefully fast-track policymakers so that we have some amazing policy examples that others can look at. OECD, I think Andreas Schleicher is fantastic. He could lead the way in having this conversation. I think this technology could actually end up being the biggest opportunity for the educational landscape.
Well, thank you for that. And on the subject of fast tracking, Refik mentioned something to me in our briefing beforehand, and he said, well, as an artist, I obviously get access to these tools 6 or 9 months ahead of everyone else, which I thought was really fascinating, not something I would have assumed about a sort of complex AI system, but you've been using these tools for years in your practice. And if you haven't been to the entrance to see Refik's installation, I urge you do. Perhaps don't take as many videos of it as I have. I may be breaching copyright at some point. But how are these tools different to the ones that you've used previously in your practice?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, incredibly depth conversation here, and I'm grateful to be here with wonderful minds. I think, first of all, let's just go over maybe the fundamentals. When we talk about AI, the input is data, and data means our memories as humanity. So fundamentally, if you look at this, we talk about artificial realities. They are not real yet. I think if you just break it up like this, we are talking about how to make things real. So I feel like it's very amazing, as an artist, fascinated by the idea of using reality to imagine. So if my machine can learn, can it dream? If it can dream, who will define what is real? I think these questions were always, as anyone creating with this field of imagination with machines, I think are very fundamental questions. What is amazing, again, I don't want to be a visual thinker. I'm very aware of what may go wrong, and of course, misunderstanding of the data, bias, all ethical problems. But I think we have to ask the question, what else can we do with them? And when we ask these questions, the generational gap, the information turning into knowledge, turning to wisdom, all these fundamentals of human understanding life becomes very interesting. For me, generative AI has a major potential to extend the human mind. Not necessarily fear of competing with jobs or losing certain opportunities. I think it's beyond that. I think we have, as discussed, an opportunity to tackle largest questions that we couldn't answer yet. Yeah. So then in this context, are we thinking about a thinking brush? For an artist, to me, AI is a thinking brush that is very exciting. And if I go to the edge of imagination, which I think artists' role in humanity is to push the boundaries of questioning and alarm mechanisms for humanity to bring problems earlier and ask the question. And I'm asking very early with my colleagues using generative AI, how can we be ready when machine decides to decide? I think demystifying the tools, decision mechanisms, and all these algorithms are extremely fundamental for humanity's basics. The reason I think I have been fortunate to work with this tool is 14 years ago, I coined the term data painting, and I have been criticized by all the art forms, this is not art, and all that is basic reaction model. But I think over the years, 7 years ago, first working with AI, by the way, 7 years feels 70 years, because the development in the field is incredible. While we are talking, I'm pretty confident in a Discord chat, right now someone fine-tuning the model and creating a better conversational model, most likely a sound engine or something like that. So in a pace like this, that we have never been aware of this speed, we have to be much more aware. So in my work, that awareness comes through, I think this is a very similar pattern we saw in the Renaissance, right? When the artists get the best pigment, best brush, the best canvas. Not so different when the tech company is asking, wait, before this becoming a product and a service, like that cliche pipeline, can we be asked the question of ethically? So the good news is, I think, for people in the fear context, there are many people in the goodwill context asking these questions. Is this tool truly ready for humanity? And I think artists' role are truly, in this context, is very important to try to question and hopefully explain to humanity through examples of experiences. So I'm grateful to say that there's a lot of room for creativity and fear, but I hope we should ask the question, what else can we do with them?
Well, thank you for that note. We'll certainly come back to that point. There is something different about these generative tools in terms of what they can do. And I think back to perhaps where we were 5 or 6 years ago when reports were coming out about automation taking all of the jobs, and we found ourselves really at the lowest level of unemployment in many of the advanced economies despite that. Yet, when you look at some of the outputs perhaps of images, there's a sense perhaps that the person who produces stock photography for PowerPoints, many of which we've had to suffer through, is going to struggle. So just thinking about the short to medium term, what do you think the impact of generative AI on the job market will be? And I'll just ask you to all give me a ranking from 1 to 10, where 10 you think it'll be really severe in a negative way, and 1 you think it'll actually be a very positive impact on that market. And perhaps if we start from Minister and go through just sort of level of 1 to 10, where would you put it?
So I think I would rank it below 5, meaning not a disastrous effect. The reason is that these images that are created through these models are based on data that was created upfront. So if these models if the future of this model is to become widely spread and widely used, they will always need content to populate the sample they learn from. And in order to generate interest for people that create this content, at some point I think there will be a question about IP, about property rights. Yeah. And those that operate these models at some point will need to provide sort of incentives for those that create the content that eventually end up in the samples from which those models learn from. Right. And so in some sense, the economics of these models require that there is some human input in the samples so that they can deliver something that human consider as sort of interesting content, right? And on top of that, of course, I see, I think the image of a brush is very interesting. I see this as a tool that is going to magnify the ability of artists or creative professionals, since this is the example that you cite, to generate more content, more creative content, because they can use this impressive tool, and they can focus on the dimension of our intelligence that artificial intelligence cannot seize, or at least that these models cannot seize. Mm-hmm. And I think that they can enrich their own creation. So I'm on the optimistic side. But
slightly on the optimistic side. Maybe I come to you, Priya, and just thinking about the teachers that you know, the educational space that you know. Does this enhance or harm the way in which they will operate over that short to medium term, the next 3 to 4 years? Yeah,
I think that this can really augment teaching and learning. And don't forget, we have countries across the globe where, for example, giving teacher feedback, the time to be able to give feedback, the time to be able to understand the nuances in every single piece of work, they're really time poor and really resource stretched. So for those that leverage it, I think it really augments teaching and learning. Look, I'm still of the principle as I was 10 years ago when I started in this space. None of you will send your kids to a school where the website has some sort of automated machine robotic kind of set of teaching and learning on it. It's just never, it's a human-to-human interaction between teacher and child. That will not be replaced. However, we have a shortage of teachers globally, millions of teachers. By 2030, there's no magic wand being waved. So I think the role might change slightly. So I think what you will have is these specialist teachers who are subject specialists, who will focus and hone in on certain areas. And I think we will end up with a layer of facilitators. And what you're seeing there is they're not subject specialists, but they will use the technology. They will leverage AI personalized learning platforms. We're seeing it across the colleges sector at the moment, where you've got a psychology graduate teaching math. Right? They don't have maths experience necessarily to that level, but they're being facilitated. I do think that was a really good question. Can I just answer the 1 to 10, please?
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
I was like waiting to be picked on. So, okay, the answer is 1, right? 4, anybody who has a lifelong learning mindset, and for anybody who is employed by an organization where they will upskill you or they will use the technology to augment, in a sense, a lower skill base. 10. For anybody who is in a country, unemployed, or working within an organization that is not thinking from now over to the next 12 to 18 months about how this technology can disrupt. And what that answer, I think, tells you is, again, amplifying the digital divide that we already see, and we have to be very careful, which is why it's an urgent conversation.
Hiroaki, if I can come to you on that, we will bring back the 1 to 10 scale then. So 10 is a terrible situation. 1 is this is going to be great. Where would you stand?
Well, I'm basically optimist. I'll say this is going to be 1.
Right.
In a way, like this, like a generative AI will provide us like new opportunities, like expand like our capabilities. You know, if you look at the our history, like human civilizations, we always augmented our space. Like new continent, or a new art form, or new technologies, or new knowledge. Right? So what the generative AI does is actually generating a new form of art or a new form of hypothesis, maybe. So in a way, when humans try to discover something, sometimes I'm a scientist, so like I'll take example of scientific discovery, come up with that, okay, this could be probably a new discovery, get the hypothesis, experiment and verify that. Mm-hmm. But as a scientist, without AI support, what has been doing in the past is, I think this is the most plausible hypothesis. Probably this is the second best, third best. But we don't know that maybe other hypothesis which is even better. So we are not really checking up like all the possible hypotheses given the existing data. And then you have to be lucky to be able to get the hypothesis, you generate the hypothesis by yourself, which is reasonably correct, and you can verify that. Combined with the generative AI capabilities, not probably the current form, we need a little bit more evolution of the generative AI capability, may be able to provide us much faster in a way that these hypotheses which may be able to solve the major problem, like zero carbon zero, or like a new drug discovery, or new chemicals, or new engineering design, or other things. So I think like this technology will be able to explore more of the knowledge space. We haven't explored it. So we're going to explore the new continent of the knowledge using probably the evolution of the generative AI. Probably not kind of generative AI at this moment, because there are some a lot of issues there. But I think this technology will continuously evolve, and very quickly come to that stage we can use it, amplify our knowledge.
Refik, I hate to put an artist like you on a linear scale from 1 to 10, but you've got to play ball here.
Happy to. I think there's 2 great answers. Of course, the dynamic one is extremely reliable, but also 5 is a wonderful number, because I think it gives a 50% chance for humanity, 50% chance for AI. And I think it's a very good one, and I think we are in a good shape. But I think when we find the fire, very like our ancestors, we cook with it, create culture. But with the same thing, we destroy each other. I think the chance is a very exciting time right now. But I think awareness will change the scale very, very dynamically. Awareness and being alive and being sure we ask the questions. But I think I want a little bit also think differently, because generative AI really can generate not only sound, image, and text. Generative AI means can also generate other senses. Right now, we are all discussing this verse concept, right? Multiverse, metaverse, places that doesn't exist but may exist. And these places are still debatable, like what they are and how would we feel them, a boring TV on our face or another marketplace versus something more exciting. And in that case, for example, we generate a scent with AI, which you can feel it, that you cannot go maybe these corals that doesn't exist, but you can maybe smell them and eventually maybe touch them by haptic connections. So we are in this exciting era, most likely, we will be pushing these multi-sensory worlds. So the touch and taste and vision and sound and conversational AI as a holistic imagination will create way exciting worlds or problems. So that's why 5 is an amazing number to be in exactly in both worlds.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that. I want to draw on a thread that Priya identified with her 1 and 10, which in a sense could be summarized as, you know, if you're in work, the threat to your job is not from AI, it's from someone with AI.
Yes.
And that is where the 1 lies and where the 10 lies. And so the question here is, what are the levers that can be pulled in the short to medium term to enable more people to be in that second category where they do have the AI tools, the capability of using them and the access. And this is obviously a huge public policy question. So Minister, perhaps if you can give us a brief view on that and we'll go through the panel.
Sure. So the first thing is that if you want to allow such a technology to be adopted, whether it's by individuals or by other organizations, corporations, and so on, you need to build some acceptance among populations. And to build acceptance, you need to build understanding. And there have been very interesting initiatives. I think of a Finnish initiative that we've imitated in France, which is by with a very simple video. To get the population to learn the basic rules of AI, how it works, that it's no magics, but it's very simple logics, all right? And by building understanding, you can then hope to build acceptance. But then, of course, I think it's very important that throughout the training programs that we have in education, in higher education, and in reskilling and upskilling programs, that these tools will be incorporating as quickly as possible, so that people get used to them, get familiarized with them, and that they can then put them in practice. But I want to highlight that before such systems, or at least those that we've seen emerging in recent weeks, get adopted by organizations, whether they're corporations or government, there needs to be some sort of regulatory borders that make sure, or that sort of set where the liabilities are, where the responsibilities are, where the accountability is. That's what we are trying to do at the European level, but I'm only mildly confident that until those regulatory boundaries are set, until we've had the discussion about ethics, about biases, about IP, I feel that the ground will not be ready for widespread adoption of such technologies in all of our corporations. So there is a lot of work to be done. And we're moving forward at the European level, but I think other regions should also follow suit.
I love this panel because every answer is fantastic and leads to yet more questions. So I'm going to only ask Hiroaki for you to respond to this question about how do you go from the AI to the human with the AI, generative AI tool. How do you think about this within Sony?
Yeah, I think people start using it. It's like a fundamental thing. We believe that we trust human creativity. Whatever new technology comes in, people will be able to find a way to use it. The question is, can we use it properly? And then what will be the market dynamics or dominance of the technology? So like generative AI requires a lot of data, a lot of computing power. And then if you got to 80% of the performance, to get like a 90%, you need magnitude bigger data, magnitude bigger computing time.
Yeah.
That means possibly only a handful of companies in the world will be able to get the top level competitive generative AI in practice into the business. And all others maybe get to some level of generative AI, but not good enough. And this difference could be the serious competitive advantage for the bigger companies who can successfully do it. So in a way, we should be able to use it very creatively. At the same time, who will own it? Someone who owns the best generative AI in the future, we're going to sweep the knowledge, in the market. Or like discovery be made. So like someone who can create like all possible drugs, with this kind of AI, will sweep the potential chemical space. Will be able to dominate the market.
Yeah.
So I think like potential divide by having someone who has like a top level AI capability done, there will be a huge divide. And so that would be the issue, how we, going to, do we regulate or do we believe all the corporate responsibilities or what we're going to do? That's kind of open questions.
Yeah.
Like I think, many big tech companies who's capable of investing on this will be able to build, wants to be on the side of having it.
Yeah.
Obviously, because like being on the side of having a big decent AI system, well, not being there is a huge difference.
Well, there's a huge risk there, right? This idea that with the most powerful computer, you could generate every possible sequence of chemicals and privately enclose them.
Yeah.
Well, fascinating.
With like AlphaFold 2 and then a possible what happens next, we can see that kind of future, right?
Yeah.
So how are we going to go with that? That will be the real issues.
Wonderful. We will turn to questions from the audience in a couple of minutes, but I just want to pick up on some of these other points with Priya and Refik. So earlier on, Hiroaki talked about all of the benefits of exploring the potential knowledge spaces that generative AI can create, and you've come up with wonderfully positive examples. But we also know that generative AI comes up with lots of unhelpful mistruths, difficult knowledge spaces. To pick up on the Minister's point about adoption, one of the clear risks would be not only are these tools very good at disguising their misinformation as truths, but they will soon be in the hands of very, very many of us from many different providers of the underlying software. So how should we think about what a sort of appropriate response to that sort of tissue of lies that might flood us be? What could that look like, Priya?
Again, it's educational, but in a different format. As consumers of AI, I think not even just for language models, but any AI, how many consumers are out there? Everyone uses AI on their phones. You're searching, you're shopping, you're investing. How many people actually understand how it works? And we've got to have this real misconception, right? Over the last maybe decade, maybe 15 years, everyone's like, oh, do a coding course, right? You don't need to do a coding course. You need to understand just how the technology works kind of theoretically and then how to apply it. And actually, that's how we create all these entrepreneurial impact opportunities. So it's kind of that broad brush, kind of educate ourselves about, well, be aware and exercise with caution, right? Exercise with caution in terms of using these technologies. If as consumers, and I know that, look, this group, even the group that's watching while we stream, sometimes it's a bit of a self-selecting group, right? Yeah. But we have a responsibility as people developing these technologies, as people implementing these technologies, to actually educate those around us in hopefully a non-patronizing way, but a helpful way, as to how these technologies actually work. And using
I'd just like to bring the Minister in on this, though. Yeah. So if there is this incipient risk rapidly approaching with the exponential spread of these technologies for this misinformation, is Priya's suggestion of greater education one that is sufficiently plausible in the time frame that we have available? Is it necessary but not sufficient? How would you look at that specific question? And then we'll come to the audience after that.
So I'm not sure I'm getting the answer correctly, but to me there are two issues. One is these models don't deliver accurate content. And there are many examples of that in recent weeks. But so the question is whether the immediate next generation of models is not able to indeed correct those many mistakes and lack of accuracies. And then we'll see that they are still going to be used for some purposes, but for limited purposes, because any time, and there are many times during our days where we need accurate responses, we won't be able to use those as our interface with the informational space. If they overcome this issue, if they become more accurate, and if we can really rely on them for accurate responses in, the information that we need to operate our daily lives, then the question is whether the populations will accept such technology. There have been many technologies in the history of mankind that have been purely and simply rejected by people for a time, for a certain amount of time, because they felt threatened by these technologies, because they did not understand them, because they felt there was sometimes something a little bit magical about these technologies that was not rational, that they just did not want. And we have, that was mentioned earlier, a digital divide in our societies. We have many people that feel that any form of digitalization is equivalent to exclusion from society. And so at the same time as we encourage and develop technology, we need to be careful to keep everyone on board. And to keep everyone on board, everyone needs to have information about the technology, what it can and what it cannot do. And I think it's important that people, without having to take a coding class, that people understand how AI works from the inside. And that is not magic. It's just logics, and it's very easy.
Can I just say, sorry, I think realistically, just to safeguard just a little bit, right? The technologists and the entrepreneurs who will use the technology within applications, in things like health, in education, trusted applications, right? Whether you're B2B or B2C, they will QA and only use this technology. I have real faith in entrepreneurs and technologists, right? And I don't think that we're going to see this massive proliferation of using the tech. I think right now we're having fun, right? Apparently Argentina did not win the World Cup because obviously ChatGPT is pre-2021 and there's all of that kind of... And apparently William the Conqueror did not win the Battle of Hastings. And
still.
Sorry, France. Yeah, but it's true. They did win the World Cup. So the thing is...
What is real?
But I think this links into that other question very, very, very quickly. It's what you just said, the education of the consumers. Our biggest problem is, right now, we might avoid a heavy set of recessions that might occur later on this year across the globe. And one of those macroeconomic factors is the fact that people are boasting unemployment, right? Unemployment is, at the moment, they're boasting strong figures. Do you know the participation rate in these countries, though? Participation meaning people actually not even bothering looking for jobs. The participation rate is really low. So if you look at huge world economies and people, 50%, for example, of the US are not even bothering looking for a job, they are disengaged. If we don't educate them about this technology that's then going to come into the first place, again, on just a high-level perspective, how do we think we're going to get these people to participate and be incentivized later, right? And so that's why I think this broader education of just how to engage with it as a consumer as we're running our daily lives.
You're going to have to...
really important.
One word, right. So I've now moved into tough moderator stance because we've only got time for one question, which will have to come from me. I'm sorry about that. And then a
sorry, everyone.
So I want to just switch
They'll replace me with ChatGPT next year.
Yeah, that's right. But I just want to switch to a question about values and, thank you, living the dream, how values might change. Refik, do you think there's a point where we might say it's fine for a generative AI system to learn all the work of an artist and to carry on their work when they're not there, perhaps when they've passed away, perhaps just to expand their expression? Is that going to be acceptable? If it is now, if not now, then when?
It's a very meaningful question. I think the answer starts with the data. And to solve this problem right at the moment, unfortunately, some artists are having significant problems about their work's use. I personally believe they are problems, and I personally don't use that path and create our own data. I want to give an example, I think maybe create a new discussion. When I think about data, I prefer to go to fundamentals. indigenous people. And we went with my partner and also studio member to the Amazon rainforests, where are lungs protected by the indigenous people called Yawanava in Brazil. And I decided to create a data set by not just dumping images into millions, but work with and co-create with the people who are protecting our lungs. And when I work with them, they teach me something very inspiring. They said, we don't have a museum, we don't have an archive, we have memories stored like this moment. This is their data set. And it's just a memory in the forest, unfortunately, a pace between the nature and the human broken. And they remember this through this data. It was my inspiration. The data, protection, bias, everything should be a part of the dialogue. And instead of a bias, we have to be responsible with the data we have. I think that will solve a lot of problems.
That's beautifully said. Now, before we finish the panel, before you all leave, I'm going to ask Kay from the forum to come and say a few words, but I'd just like to thank the panelists first, if I may, Kay. So I'd like to thank Refik and Priya and Hiroaki and Minister for their words on generative AI. There's more to come, of course. Thank you. And Kay, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you to the panel and Azeem for a lovely session. I'm Kay Firth-Butterfield. I'm head of artificial intelligence and do some quantum at the World Economic Forum. If you have enjoyed this, if you want to learn more about generative AI, how we think about generative AI with the digital divide, for example, just the indigenous people who don't actually have their data on the internet, then at the moment those models aren't going to be picking it up, and so do their cultures just disappear from the world? All of those really important topics. We'd love to invite you to be part of the work that we do at the Forum on responsible AI, on thinking about AI with climate and climate change and how we can adapt for the next, for climate change. So please talk to me or just talk to me on TopLink if you're interested in continuing this particular conversation. Thank you.
Thanks.